To breaking news on Capitol Hill. Moments ago, Congressman Ron Paul going after Federal Reserve Chief Ben Bernanke.
This Congress ought to get a backbone. They ought to say we deserve to know, we have a right to know, we have an obligation to know, because we have an obligation to defend our currency. It's the destruction of the currency that destroys the middle class. There is a principle in free market banking that says if you destroy the value of currency through inflation, you transfer the wealth from the middle class and it gravitates to the very wealthy.
Our first guest here on Markets Now, surely watching this confrontation very closely. There's the judge, Ron Paul versus Ben Bernanke. Maybe the last time with Congressman Paul retiring. What do you make of what was said?
Well, Congressman Paul has been making this argument for 35 years. And when he first made the argument, and in a nutshell it is, we have the right to know what the Fed does, what it owns, basically audit it, because what it does profoundly affects our savings and the value of our homes and everything we own. When he started making that argument 35 years ago, he was a lone wolf.
Yes.
He persuaded Ronald Reagan to accept that argument. The last time legislation was introduced in the House and the Senate, more than half the members of the House and more than half the members of the Senate co-signed the legislation. It still didn't pass. So this is his last opportunity as a sitting member of the House, not only to remind the Congress and the public that we have a right to know what the Fed is doing, but he's also reminding them of the harm that is caused when we don't know what the Fed is doing.
But Congressman Paul would rather not have a central bank, would he not? I mean, he doesn't want the Fed.
Congressman Paul is of the view, a view that I share, that the Constitution mandates that only a commodity, silver or gold, could be our currency, and that the currency's value should float by supply and demand like anything else. Stated differently, it shouldn't be regulated by bureaucrats to suit their needs.
I always go back to, rather than debate the legality of it, because I will fail at that miserably, you go back to what was our country like prior to having the Federal Reserve System. And it was panic after panic after panic, because it is a bank for banks and for bankers.
But
and it was panics and runaway inflation, too.
Before we had the Federal Reserve, the value of the dollar essentially remained the same from 1787 to 1913. Since the Federal Reserve, the value of the dollar has gone down by 92%. Almost all of that by inflation.
All major nations have central banks, and all currencies have fallen as well. So it's not like you can't hold us out.
I was going to say, even those who don't share that view, even those who don't agree with you or agree with Congressman Paul would say, hey, we need a more transparent Fed. But haven't we been getting one? Hasn't he been having some success? I mean, there's not as much secrecy at the Federal Reserve as there used to be.
Let me tell you something. Fox Business Network, and the lead plaintiff was Kevin McGee. The case is called McGee versus the Federal Reserve. Actually prevailed in federal court here in New York to get documents that the Fed did not want to give involving TARP and some of the stimulus packages.
So you're not going to get rid of the Fed.
That was a little bit of the crack in the ice. And when we saw what was happening as a result of that litigation, I think that members of Congress who like the Fed decided, you know what, I want to know what they're doing. There are Democrats, liberals, Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians who sign on to that legislation. But it still doesn't pass because the president has threatened it, and the Fed has very, very deep tentacles into Congress to keep itself in the dark. We know more about the CIA than we do about the Fed.
But in some ways, we do want the Congress and our lawmakers to keep their tentacles out of our central bank, do we not? Because, again, you open it up to manipulation by those lawmakers, and they will use it, as we've seen in the past, to their own devices.
You are giving me a Hobson's choice, and the choice is between a Federal Reserve of private bankers that can do what they want or a Federal Reserve run by politicians. My argument would be the free market, where the value of currency floats like anything else.
And we have bank panics. Multiple bank panics.
Well, the reason
again, if you go back to what the 1800s were,
I was going to say, one more from the judge on this.
Panics.
Yes.
Are a price that you pay for the free market. But not everybody suffered in panics. Those who risked the most lost the most. Those who were conservative retained their wealth.
To be continued.
Yes.
But you're great.
You're the best.
Pleasure, guys.
All right. Well, we're going to stay on this topic.